Hello, insatiable listeners. Thank you for making season 7 one of our most engaging and downloaded seasons yet. The show is growing very organically because of your great reviews and word of mouth. No GMOs and glyphosate needed. Thank you. I will return on June 5th with our next season, season number 8, and a bigly announcement. Seriously, this is big. In the meantime, enjoy these previous Insatiable episodes. You know how each episode is jam-packed, so being in a different place with your health journey, you'll hear new things and deepen your ahas. Also, remember, we have transcripts of all of these episodes that you can find at alishapiro.com/podcast. In the meantime, if you haven't left a review yet, please do. It's one of the biggest ways the show grows because it helps more people find the show. And it's super easy to leave a review. Here's how you do it. On your iOS mobile device, so either your Apple phone or your Apple Podcast, launch Apple's podcast app. Tap the search tab in the lower right corner of the screen, and then you'll enter the name of the podcast you want to rate or review, in this case, Insatiable. Tap the blue search key at the bottom right or tap the podcast name in the drop-down list. Then you tap the album art for the podcast. You tap the reviews tab. Then tap write a review at the bottom of the screen. If you're not already signed into iTunes, you'll be asked to enter your iTunes password to log in. Then, if you just want to leave a star review, tap how many stars to leave a rating. And if you want to add some written thoughts and share your voice, enter a review title, text, and content to leave a review. And then you tap send. And lastly, feel great about having contributed to the success of the Insatiable podcast. And here's some great reviews we've gotten from other people in our community. Christy Conrad writes, Allie digs very deep. This is a super helpful podcast for women to understand why they react the way they do or think the way they do. Outstanding stuff. Thank you, Christy. KDVSJV 2017 writes, honest, informative, and refreshing. She says, I found this podcast looking for something with Jolene Hart, who was interviewed for the podcast on her Eat Pretty series. Yes, Jolene is one of my really close friends. And she says, and I haven't stopped listening since. I live in a small town where people aren't quite as educated on health and wellness, although we are moving to Philly soon. So this podcast enough has been a sign for me. And listening to an episode makes me feel like I'm sitting down having an intellectual conversation with friends. I'm very much a find the root problem kind of person and always have been. And listening to this podcast has even opened up some truths for me about myself. This is truly the only podcast of its kind that I've found that's easy to follow, and I've been searching for something like this for a while. Definitely the kind where you find yourself listening to one episode 6 or 7 times just because you want to soak in all the insight and information. Thank you so much, KDV SJV 2017. And I hope you're enjoying your move to Philly, and you're going to find there's a lot of people there who don't know much about health and wellness, as well as where I live in Pittsburgh or even New York City. It's amazing what people don't know and what they do, right? We all have different ideas. But it can be helpful when there's a larger mass of people who think like you. And another review from Curly Girl 3, everything I've been looking for. I've either been dieting or hating myself for my whole life. There was no in between, either white knuckling around food or thinking I'm the worst person on the planet until now. Thank you, Allie, for connecting the dots for me. I've always known that I wasn't fat because of the food, but I didn't know what to do past that knowledge. But now I have some tools in my tool belt that help me process my stress and anxiety without binging. I feel so powerful and will always be grateful to you. This podcast is a lifesaver. Well, thanks, Curly Girl 3, for listening and running with the information. I love when people take action. And lastly, before I head out and let you listen to these other episodes, don't forget about our Insatiable membership community. This is a super innovative community, just like our conversations. Not only are you going to have amazing people who want to talk about the kind of stuff that we talk about on the podcast and even go deeper and are taking action around it, and getting support. But we also have a once a month mastermind. So, for example, in March, our theme was physical hunger. And I presented about 5 questions, and then each person reflected. And then we were broken out into groups. This is all virtual, where people could learn from each other and try to troubleshoot or go deeper with their own hunger. And it's been so great because it sparked all these conversations in our really easy to use online platform where people are finding ways to simplify their food so they actually eat before they get too hungry. Some people are uncovering a lot of the food rules they were living by they didn't realize. And there's just so much more that comes out of these masterminds. And then also once a month, there's a Q&A call with me. So you can come to the call and bring any questions no matter where you are on your journey. This last week, we had an Insatiable membership community member ask about, she wanted to hear more about food as attachment because it came up, another member had been talking about it in relation to their child. And so we had this great conversation about how food serves as attachment for us and what that means in terms of attachment theory and how we eat, whether we're eating in private or we're only giving ourselves a certain amount of food to eat, or we restrict or whatnot, what that says about how we feel safe and how food is actually, that pattern makes us feel grounded and rooted, even if it's uncomfortable. So we had a great deep dive on the psychology of that. And again, I just can't say enough about the other community members who are so wise, kind, and curious. And we're just having such great conversations and results. Here's what some of our community members have had to say about it. SI said, I got more out of one Insatiable call than my mindful eating app. Lori Horowitz said, the Insatiable community has helped me to not use food to comfort myself during a time of intense stress. And Linda Gilbert, who you've heard on the podcast before, said, the November mastermind on holiday eating was incredible. I uncovered something about myself that I didn't know was buried in there, and it totally changed my approach to the holidays. They ended up so much more meaningful as I felt deeper connection to loved ones after removing what had been a barrier that I created in my head. So again, it's just such a good time in there. I hope you'll come check us out. There's monthly and yearly options, and you can find details at alishapiro.com/IC2019. And again, we'll be back with season 8 on June 5th. Oh, and this season, you are just going to love it. And I can't wait to share my other big surprise. I wonder if you know what it is. Stay tuned.
Hello, Insatiable listeners, Allie here. I want to let you know about my A Path Forward workshop that I'll be presenting live in the cities of Los Angeles, San Francisco, Philadelphia, New York, and Denver. Traditional goals like lose 30 pounds or cut out sugar do not work for the seasoned dieter. What those do is it gives you more rules, more restriction, and more rebellion, and that gives all the power to the food. In A Path Forward workshop, you will learn your one true goal that gives you the power and enables you to achieve your health and weight loss goals. I hope you'll join me in these live workshops as I'd love to meet so many of you in person. Visit my website, alishapiro.com, A Path Forward workshop for all the details and to sign up. I can't wait to meet you.
She said, a moderator is that you find the occasional indulgent heightens your pleasure and strengthens your resolve. So like if you can have a little bit of chocolate, you're like, oh, I'm good to go, rather than like all or nothing. And then you get panicky at the thought of never getting or doing something. If you're an abstainer, if you have trouble stopping something once you've started. So it's the inevitable, I'm just going to have one bite, and then that turns into the downward spiral. That you're like, nothing's ever going to change, or one glass of wine turns into 3, or...
You know battling food in your body doesn't work. You want to love and accept yourself. And because you're insatiable, you want results too. And wouldn't you know, you bring the same intensity to your life, wanting to maximize your time, potential, and experiences you have here on this beautiful and wondrous planet Earth. Fair warning, it will be a roller coaster, but for those insatiable, that's your prime time to thrive. We're here to say yes to the hunger of wanting it all. I'm your co-host, Ali Shapiro, a health coach who helps people end the losing battle of dieting and find a truce with food.
And I'm Juliette Berg, nutritionist, fitness expert, and the co-owner of Unite Fitness Studio franchise. Welcome to episode 68, the pros and cons of Gretchen Rubin's personality types. Gretchen Rubin of the Happiness Project has identified 2 eating types, the abstainer and the moderator. We wanted to shed some light on how these 2 types are only one way of looking at someone's often very complicated relationship with food. In this episode, we share where we agree and disagree with these 2 distinct categories.
So Juliet, this is really interesting. A listener wrote into me that she was curious about Gretchen Rubin's take. You know who Gretchen Rubin is from the Happiness Project?
All the happiness books, yes. Well, when you go to Barnes & Noble and you look at the self-help aisle, her books take up like half of it. I feel like the lower shelf is all Gretchen Rubin books.
I think I read her Happiness Project. I forget. I don't know, I kind of feel like happiness isn't the goal, but we do need happiness in our lives. And she came out with like personality types. After the Happiness Project, there were these other books. And a listener wrote in and she was curious about 2 of the personality types that she came up with related to eating. And one is the moderator. And according to Gretchen Rubin's website, she said a moderator is that you find the occasional indulgent heightens your pleasure and strengthens your resolve. So like if you can have a little bit of chocolate, you're like, oh, I'm good to go, rather than like all or nothing. And then you get panicky at the thought of never getting or doing something.
So like going on a Whole30 or a cleanse freaks you out because you're like, oh, I can't have it. Oh my God.
Exactly. So that's a moderator. And then the other personality type is if you're an abstainer, if you have trouble stopping something once you've started. So it's the inevitable, I'm just going to have one bite, and then that turns into the downward spiral that you're like, nothing's ever going to change, or one glass of wine turns into 3, or, I constantly think of it as in my life, it used to be like diet starts tomorrow, or
Yeah.
And then the other qualifier for an abstainer is you aren't tempted by things that you decided are off limits. So once you say, I am never going to have cake again, you never have cake again. And like I would say, actually, I went off sugar back in January and I've stuck with it. And I've had to do a lot of work to get to that point of eliminating it, but I don't know if I'll go back. And I feel like I can abstain from sugar.
Mm-hmm.
So the listener wrote in, what do we think of these? Like, do we believe in them? Pros and cons? And, part of my graduate work is I had to study like several different personality tests, from Myers-Briggs to the Enneagram to these different executive ways of looking at coaching and stuff. And I think things like these are helpful only to a point, like personality tests, right? Like astrology, Myers-Briggs, all this stuff. If it can help you see a pattern within yourself, but I also think they then limit you and make them seem fatalistic, or
They put you in a box.
Yes. So for example, like when I work with my clients in Truths with Food, a lot of them will say they're introverts or extroverts, right? But then as they start to heal their stories, they thought only their weight was holding them back, but they start to realize how they're holding themselves back in relationships. And the introverts start to realize, oh, I'm a little bit more of an extrovert, or that I need deeper connection more often. And the extroverts often start to realize, oh, I don't need to be out there so much. Like I actually like more alone time. And so I always, this actually came up in the last Truths with Food group about, okay, you can hold that maybe you have introverted tendencies, and you need to know then that when you're at a party, you don't need to stay there the whole time. However, don't put yourself in this box that I don't enjoy social events. Maybe it's because you just haven't found deep connection. So that's what I mean by, you put yourself in a box and limits you to knowing who you truly are.
Yeah. And I think that if you were to ask me out of the moderator or the abstainer what I am, I've been both of those things at different times in my life. I definitely was the abstainer when I was struggling with food, in the way of I couldn't just have a cookie. I would eat all of them. And it was very black and white for me. And if I made a decision like, okay, I'm doing this, week-long diet, I would abstain from whatever I said I was going to abstain from. As I healed my relationship with food, it sort of morphed itself more into the moderator, which is like, if I have a little bit, I'm okay. And it makes it so that I don't overdo it. And I think there was a transition time of where I was panicky about like thinking about never having something or going on a diet, because I'd been on so many diets for so long that I was like, I never want to do it again. It was coming from this place of like fear. But I think that it depends on where you are. You can be both. You can be one, you can be the other, you can be both. I think that there are layers to these things. I don't think it's black and white.
Yeah. Well, and this reminds me when we had Marie on from the keto diet, and she was like, well, my clients tend to be all or nothing, which would be the abstainer type. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And when she said that, I thought, my clients are all or nothing, but I don't accept that that's actually how they are. I see all or nothing as a symptom.
Like a symptom of their story and their conditioning.
Yes, yes. And so when I look at this, an abstainer, you have trouble stopping something once you've started. You aren't tempted by things that you've decided. Because what I've seen with my clients is when they tell themselves, okay, I'm going on the Whole30, right? I'm abstaining, right? By day 9 or 10, though, they start thinking about that food more and more, right? Or right after they go off the Whole30, it's like, oh my God, and they definitely binged the night before, right? So people still are tempted. And I think this abstainer of having trouble stopping something once you've started, that's when it comes to food, it's not all about the food. And as you were saying the story, there's this, each of us has a story in our life that makes us turn to food. And the food is on the surface, but it's also not about the food. So yes, your blood sugar has to be balanced, but I think with people, and I do think there probably are genuinely some abstainers. And I think there are people like who probably never learned about nutrition and then maybe one day picked up a book on like functional medicine or something and was like, oh my God, I feel amazing. And they had no food history.
Yes, I have a client like that. She went gluten-free, never looked back. It wasn't because she had a bad relationship with food, though. She never had a relationship with food ever.
Right. And then she discovers one and it's only
and she's
positive.
One of those people that's like, food is so annoying. I can't believe that I actually like have to cook or like care. I don't want to care. I'm like,
and the rest of the world is like, you're annoying because you think like that.
If I didn't have to eat, I would be so happy. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, that's a little worrisome too, though. But no,
she's just a high profile executive and is like really, which is a whole nother thing, right? She's out of touch with her actual like physical body.
Yeah,
always in her head.
But I found, in 2012, when I worked with Bob, who we've had on the podcast, I was so disinterested in food, but I was also like clinically depressed that year. And I found when I really don't want to cook or I don't care what I eat, I also don't feel like there's like any possibility in my life. Like for me personally.
Overwhelm. You're having overwhelm.
Yeah. Yeah. Like food should, and this is that moderation approach, right? Like, and again, I think the healthier your relationship is to food, you have different definitions of moderation. Like for me, the thought of going sugar-free 3 years ago would have been extreme. And now that I decided to do it because I was having trouble sleeping and I was feeling really combative after the election. And so I was like, I'm doing this to sleep better. And it helps so much. And then when I was out West, I normally get so tired from jet lag and the time change. And I wasn't sleeping well. I was still so on. I had so much energy. I was like, this is so worth it. So like, it feels like I'm being moderate by not having sugar anymore. Like I know that, which before that would have been extreme for me, but now I feel so great. And it doesn't feel hard at all. I don't even consider myself an abstainer because if I come across something that I want, I'll probably have it.
Yeah. You're not closing off to the possibility of having sugar ever again. It's just like, you're feeling good right now.
Yeah. So good. So good. So yeah. So I think these are like, I find it interesting how you talked about you could be both at the same time. And I think if you're both at the same time, then you're really not either, right? Because
cancel each other out.
Well, no, but I think what she's talking about is like, this is a pattern you have over time, right? Mm-hmm. Is the abstainer. And I think for people, especially probably who listen to our podcast, they've tried that abstaining, but then it brings up the panic that the moderator feels.
Yes, as I was saying, you have tendencies of both.
Yeah. Yeah,
that was definitely what I had was when I was going through a lot of food issues was I was trying to abstain, but then I was having the panic that came along with the abstaining.
Right. Well, and this is why, honestly, of all the quote unquote, like addictions or challenges, I love the most because, if you're going off smoking, you can just quit cold turkey. It's hard. I've had friends who've tried to quit, several times. I'm not saying it's easy, but you can live without cigarettes. You can go cold turkey on alcohol. You can quit drugs, right? You can quit shoplifting. But food, metaphorically, you have to realistically, you have to learn to live with. but I think it's a challenge. I don't even think of it as an addiction, but you can't ignore it. And so you have to go through the heart of it, I guess, where I think there's incredible transformative power. And it can be an invitation into your most powerful, healthy, vital self if you're willing to go through that. But I think so many people in our culture, first of all, I think the dieting industry underestimates people, right? It's like, no, you need these guidelines, you need these rules. You don't know, you can't learn your body.
Slight sidetrack, but how do you feel about the dieting industry currently? I feel like this is a podcast topic and it's in and of itself, but just quickly, like, have you been thinking about it lately? Just kind of where things have shifted, or because I feel like it's changed a bit over like the past year or so.
How, honestly, I don't pay attention to what's changed or.
Well, I feel like there are less gimmicky diets out there, like maybe I haven't been paying attention as much, but like the pills and the, sprinkle this on your food and all the fat, like fasting. And it is a little bit more about like just eating natural, like whole foods.
So the sprinkling of this, or what did I take? Kava when I was in high school, or less of the pills, but I still think people think that idea of a silver bullet is translated now into something like the Whole30, or something like a juice cleanse, or something like quote unquote clean eating, or a sugar detox. So I think it's making like incremental progress, but I think it's still dressed up as this is going to be the thing, and nothing focuses on the dieter or the eater themselves. And
your relationship with the actual food and how you feel about your body and what you're putting in it, and your confidence with how you're feeding yourself.
Yeah, rather than, this is what we talked about with trigger foods, the trigger food episode and falling off the wagon, is the question isn't how do I get better at resisting food, which is what I feel like these moderator and abstainer categories are asking. And that gives the power to food, versus saying, how do I become the person who feels powerful around food? And again, that's what we do in Truths with Food, which is coming up. It's open for registration, I think, by the time you guys listen to this podcast. So definitely check it out. And I'm having a Cookie Isn't Just a Cookie workshop, which is the first step in Truths with Food, on Saturday, March 18th. And you can sign up at my website, alishapiro.com/a cookie isn't just a cookie, for that if you want to work on this. But I totally sidetracked because I wasn't planning to say that, but then I totally added it in. I think that all of those things like juice cleanses and even clean eating I think they are better, but I still think they're trying to find different ways for people to cut calories.
Mm-hmm.
But
good answers.
What?
Good answers.
Yeah. And but there's pros and cons, right? We did a pro and con on the Whole30. And I think it's really powerful when someone can eliminate certain foods and realize how great they can feel. Because I know my biggest challenge, and I bet it's one of yours, is people have normalized such a low level of health. And when you look around you, everyone else feels the same way, right?
Yeah.
So people don't realize how great they can feel. So some people do that Whole30, or they go off sugar, and it's like, wow, even me, I'm pretty self-aware. And then going sugar-free, and the longer I'm sugar-free, I can't believe the changes in my energy, the calmness. Like I thought I was doing pretty well. But I think there's always this further and further line you can take it that feels more and more rewarding. And I think diets limit the possibilities of how good it can get.
It really, really depends on where you are for making these choices that are going to work for you, on if there's anything to abstain from. And, like sugar, for example, with you, Allie, like where I am in my life with all my businesses opening and so much added workload and stress, I would never want to take on a sugar cleanse right now. Because it would trigger me into a deeper stress than I need to. Now, that's not to say that I'm not focusing on making sure that I'm not eating a ton of sugar that will throw me into bad blood sugar and feeling bad. So, but I'm more in that moderator state of mind right now, where it's like I'm having a little bit, but not an excessive amount. And I'm monitoring myself every day and knowing kind of what do I need today? Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I think that is incredibly insightful and shows how you know your own body, and how what you're saying is, because I'm always telling my clients when they ask questions, I'm like, it depends, right? Everything is relative.
Mm-hmm.
And what you just so beautifully and elegantly described is right now, being moderate is the healthiest thing for you. And to try to abstain or like get kicked into that gear would backfire. You know, I was having a call with the client. She's studying for a really, really, really big exam. And she's having some chocolate, and it's much better than when we started working on it together, you know? And she told me she got on the scale and she's like 1 or 2 pounds, or I think 1 or 2 pounds. She stopped working out because she's got to, you know, study for this exam. And she's just circling for right now. And she's like, I hate to say that like things are going to get better once this big exam is over. And I said, but you know what? It is going to be different. That's a legit change because the pressure is there. You're going to get time back. You can start to exercise again. And I told her, I think it's actually really healthy that you're in this holding pattern, like circling, and you're realizing that you're shocked that the scale isn't going up. You know, you're just like staying within the same. And you have to have those periods where you realize that, quote, being imperfect doesn't send the scale through the roof. And so I think her being, quote unquote, moderate right now is super healthy for her, you know?
I think it's good practice, especially for those who tend to not ever be moderate.
Yeah, right. That's what I was saying to her.
Really good practice.
Well, because moderation, when you're healing your relationship to food, feels like imperfection and it feels like bad. It feels like you're failing. And I said to her, I was like, you just created a new meaning of what your chocolate means. Because in the past it meant I'm being bad, I'm going to gain weight. And now you know it means nothing.
It's very true. It doesn't. It only has meaning if you put meaning on it.
Right. And that meaning is very, very hard to change. I mean, that's what we do in Truths with Food is that same food, that same spiral downwards you realize it's not a spiral downwards anymore. I mean, you have to do certain behavior and meaning changes, but we give you the tools to do that in Truths with Food. But it's so freeing when you're like, a chocolate is just a chocolate. I'm going to have it because I want it.
Perfect example. Yeah. Yesterday, actually, I was crashing and just got my period and was just like fatigue just set over. And I was like, I can't focus. I need something. I need a coffee, something. And I went across the street to this bakery that I used to go to. They since moved, but I used to go there, I don't know, 8-9 years ago when I was really in the thick of my food issues. And I remember I used to go there and get these muffins, and I wouldn't be able to just have like one. I'd have to get, it would set me off. If I would allow myself to have it, that means that I would then go into a downward spiral of like, I'll take one of everything, please. And I went there and I asked the woman, the owner, I said, what do you have that's really, really, really chocolatey and has the least amount of sugar in it? And she pointed me to these like tiny little flourless chocolate cake bites. It was like a bite-sized piece of a flourless chocolate cake. So I got that and I got a decaf coffee and it was like heaven. It was amazing. But I needed that. I could have said no, but more like I wanted that and it helped me. Having that helped me yesterday.
I remember feeling when I was coming out of my own Truths with Food, my own battle with food, I remember feeling like it was magical when I could have just one bite of something.
It
like
is
what you're describing.
Super magical.
It was
I didn't want any more. It was so satisfying and it did what it needed it to do.
Yes. And that is like, because we're supposed to enjoy life. Like, hello, food is supposed to be enjoyable. Like
what?
Well, and what you just described is you savored it, right? And when you savor food, you actually find that more is not better. More is not more.
No, I sat down outside on the stoop of my business. First of all, it was 70 something degrees. We've been having freaky weather.
Climate crisis.
But I was like, when will I get to do this? Sit outside with this coffee and this flourless chocolate cake and just take a moment to take a deep breath in my life and just sit here and eat this.
I love that. I know think about sometimes when I have my clients, they're like, yeah, I got really crazy and I know I'm not supposed to do dairy, but I did the heavy whipping cream. And I'm like, you are wild, And it's like, and like your body can handle it a little bit. And I believe, like, metaphorically, everyone complains about we're in this, like, everyone gets a trophy, culture. And it's like, no one has any resilience anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's true, but I think it's really healthy for our body to, quote unquote, have some, quote, dirty food, right? Like, the more you quote unquote try to be clean, right? It's like, that's like a metaphor for imperfect. And like, where does the greatest results and power come from? From the mud, right? From the resilience, or,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's all about savoring. And so that's why I think overall, I don't know if I really believe, I think maybe 10% of the world is abstainers. If they've
But let me ask you this. What was the purpose of her determining these different personality types with eaters to help you understand yourself? But where do they go from there?
Well, I think it's like, okay, if you realize that you're a moderator, then you can know that that's who you are. And this is how you have to deal with food. Or if you're an abstainer, then you need to know that you're just better at nothing.
I'm laughing a little bit because, like, from working with clients over the years that it's not black and white like this. Okay, you know who you are now. Great. Have fun. Now you know how to be with food. It's not how it is at all.
Well, and that's why I was saying, like, in graduate school, I had to learn all these different ways of personality typing. And that is very helpful up until the person can see their pattern, but then not be held hostage by it, and I think what happens is, like, I'll take astrology, for example. When I was, I used to read my horoscope. I'm a Libra, but then I met people who really knew astrology, and they're like, no, that's like traditional nutrition information. Like, you need to know your rising sign. You need to know the planet that's the most, that's the most significant for you. And you need to know, like, all this other stuff. And then there's traditional astrology. It's like, whoo, like, that was such a generic way of looking at things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think things like this can be helpful, but we're all so much more dynamic. And I know, having worked with people through my Truths with Food method, is that we think we know ourselves, but often we don't realize that many of our habits are as a result of reacting to old stories that we don't know are running our lives, and we don't know we're held back in ways. And
one of my favorite things to say is when somebody's like, that's just how I am, or that's just who I am. I'm like, that's not who you are. That's how you're being. That's just how you're reacting, how you're responding. It's not really who you are. Like, I'm stubborn, or I'm this, or I'm that. I'm a homebody. Okay. Like, maybe there's some truths to some of it, but I think that oftentimes it depends on our circumstance, where we are in our life. And like you said, we put these labels on ourselves. We create these stories, and we put ourselves in a box. And a lot of times it's not really who we are. And then that is causing a major discomfort because you're not really living your truth.
I love that you said that. That's my whole focus is what is true. And I think we spend most of our adult lives, like, unlearning.
You talk about the wounds that we have. We have these wounds that are pretty significant from things that have happened to us in different parts of our life, oftentimes in the formative years when we're really young, and they get kind of etched in there. And then, like you said, you're trying to unlearn those things.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes is, and Aaron Brockovich made it famous, and so did Gloria Steinem. It says, "The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off." And I love that, because what we do in Truths with Food is you see the story that kind of created this wounded pattern. And then you see today how you're keeping that story going. Mm-hmm. And it's who you think you are. And you just keep re-injuring yourself. You keep remaking life harder for you. And the battle with food is the tip of the iceberg. I think that's the hardest part of Truths with Food, is you have to take ownership of, oh, this is my story. And then, but you can unwind that. Like, remember we were joking on the Katie Hess episode which ran last week, like, wouldn't it be great if Oprah handed out, like, pattern unravelings? Like, you get a pattern unraveling.
My God, that'd be amazing.
But there's so much gold in these wounds. And I think that's what our culture skips over, of like, what are you most proud of in your life? What has given you the most power, Juliet?
What am I most proud of? I mean, it's around my story and being able to make a life for myself with all the circumstances that I had, all the cards that were dealt weren't that great. And it could have gone a bunch of different ways. And the way that I chose was to follow my heart and my dreams and make them happen, even though I had a lot of really fucked up things happen that could have prevented me from sitting here today. So that.
Yeah, I just got chills. It's the stuff that was the hardest and you work through.
Yeah. Yeah. Building that strength.
Yeah. The most powerful people are not the people where everything went their way.
Ain't that the truth?
And I think too, some of my clients will say, well, I never had cancer, and I'm like, it doesn't have to be cancer. It doesn't have to be the cards that you were dealt. A lot of my clients realize that some of their food issues were from being bullied, or from moving around a lot, or from growing up in a divorced home. Those are all challenging. And it's not like whose trauma is worst, right?
If you have a food issue, it is not coming out of nowhere. It's stemming from something. It doesn't just happen in thin air. If you are someone who struggles with your self-image, you don't love yourself, and you have a complicated relationship with nourishing yourself, that stems from something. So, for those of you listening who are like, there's no reason why I should have this, I don't get it. Like, you will understand. You have to kind of dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a huge thing, but like I have a new client that I'm working with now, and it's because her family had these issues and they were passed down to her. She had an anorexic mother and anorexic grandmother. And so the stories that she's been told since she was in the womb were restrict food. You're not allowed to love yourself. You're not going to be happy unless you're thin. Like, these are the things that her mother felt and that her mother's mother felt, and that she now is working through. And it's funny because she kind of gets that it doesn't even feel like her own, but she's taken it on.
That's such a good example of like, is she a moderator or abstainer? I would say, who knows? She's
both on any given day.
Right. But I would say, which means she's neither, which means she's got to figure out her truth. She doesn't know. It's like a symptom that's been. She
literally does not know what kind of eater she is. And because of her norm was her norm. What she grew up with was different than what you grew up with, what I grew up with around food. So all you know is what you've learned, what you've observed, what you've absorbed. And so for her, she's trying to figure out what's right, what's wrong. She's like, I only know this one way. So she has to figure it out for herself now. But what she does know is that she shouldn't feel tortured. And that's a great place to start. Knowing that these feelings I have inside, these feelings of upset and discomfort and hatred for myself aren't good feelings. And I think that there's another way.
Beautiful. I think we can end there. No, I think it's true. Like, if either of those categories stress you out, or they don't settle, or they don't feel right, then they're not yours. Mm-hmm. You don't, just because someone came up with some personality types from observation, which they may apply for other people, but I'm just someone who doesn't take anything at face value either. And I don't think most of our listeners are. I don't think you are. And, I know too, a lot of my clients tend to be really sensitive. They tend to be really thoughtful and caring. And I'm not saying that any of Gretchen Rubin or any of these people aren't, but I think if you are a more sensitive, emotional person, these categories, there might be other categories that don't exist.
Yeah.
So
I think to finish out the episode today, Allie, if you could read the review that we just got on iTunes. We just got an amazing review from a listener, and we encourage everybody to go on to iTunes. If you can, help us out, leave a review. It helps to keep the show going. It's very easy to do it. If you can't figure it out, seriously, Google, leave an iTunes review. It'll show you everything step by step. But I would love to leave our listeners with this review because it really opened up our hearts. And both Allie and I got teary listening to it. It was just so special.
Yeah. Before I read it, I just want to remind everyone that Truths with Food is open for enrollment now. And if you want to check it out, I highly recommend it. AllieShapiro.com/truthswithfood. It's the only time it's running this year, and the price is going up in 2018. So get it while you can. Okay, so here is the review from Lori in Colorado. Thank you, Lori. I just found it, meaning our podcast, last week, and am binge listening on my 45-minute commute to and from work. And in just one short week of about 5 podcasts, I can already feel my strained, complicated relationship with food changing, because each podcast is so packed full of information, positivity, honesty, and most importantly, compassion. Compassion for all of us who struggle with food issues, body issues, human issues, navigating this crazy food landscape. They don't say shit like, and she didn't swear on iTunes. Chew each bite 30 times while sitting at the table with no distractions and drink a full glass of water before each meal. Duh. This is real world advice, and there are no bad foods. Listening to Allie and Juliet and their guests share their knowledge and stories makes me feel finally, at age 48, like someone gets it and can explain it to me in a way that resonates with me. And that makes me feel cautiously optimistic, hopeful. I do not know how to explain it further. Just trust me and try it yourself. I started with emotional eating, then skipped around to all the topics that were closest to my own personal struggles, and will then go back and start at number 1. This is life-changing and empowering, and I'm so thankful that something like this exists. Thank you, Lori, for taking the time. And thank you to all our listeners who left reviews and who tune in.
Thank you so much for listening to the Insatiable podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can connect with us on social media. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Juliet Unite and Allie at Allie M. Shapiro. M stands for Marie. Please feel free to also email us any questions. We would love to hear from all our listeners. You can reach us at Allie at allieshapiro.com and Juliet at unitefitness.com. We'll see you next time.